It's about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What I have on the menu today is very special. First, because it has to do with user interfaces, and you all know that I am into that kind of thing, but also because I have a guest. Hello. So
Hi.
For people who don't know, this is John Matthews from Tukan Studios, but if you're watching this, you probably know him. And he is the person behind all the Tukan Studio plugins that have great user interfaces, very usable, very intuitive. And John is joining us to talk about how he did the knobs, the controls, the mouse interactivity, that kind of thing that really makes the Tukan Studio plugins shine. So I guess my first question to you is, do you design on paper? Do you design on some kind of app? Do you design on whiteboard? How do you first get the concept of the layout, where the buttons are going to go, how they're going to look like, and that sort of thing?
Oh, interesting question. No, I don't prepare things like that. I have things in my mind, what I want to do. And in a way, it just comes out while making the plugins. And sometimes it's, oh, no, I can't do this that way. This knob is too big. This is wrong. Oh, wrong color, things like that. And then I change it during the process of making the plugins. But I always start making a plugin without any graphical user interface, just with the sliders we all know in the JSFX. And when everything's working, I do the graphics. And most of the time, I need some more sliders while doing the graphics. So It's all in progress.
I like that. I like this kind of design where you're designing in the tool that you will end up using. And it is great that JSFX allows you to do that even in real time. As you save, you will see the changes, because I find that sometimes the place you are in, the context, will affect the design decisions. So you may think that this color will work and it won't when maybe you are designing on something like Photoshop, and then when you go to JSFX, the color doesn't really work, the mouse is weird, and then you have to go back to the other app. So when I'm doing design like web design, I also tend to design in the browser. And when I'm doing JSFX, I tend to design in REAPER, I guess. So I appreciate that. And when it comes to the assets, so you have images for buttons, images for the background, all of that. What do you use to create that?
Oh, GIMP.
Nice.
So I have no real. Okay, GIMP is a real graphics program. I don't have this expensive things like Adobe stuff and things like that. Like GIMP, like JKnobMan, things like that.
And do you usually design everything from scratch, or do you do a collage of existing buttons, I don't know, images of cabinets and amplifiers, that sort of thing?
Oh, depends on what I'm doing. Most of the time, talking about knobs, which we're up to today, there's a great gallery of knobs which people designed and uploaded for this program I use, this JKnobMan program. And often I use knobs that were already existing and modify them to my likes. Sometimes I really do them from scratch. But the background graphics and other graphical things going on in the plugin, I really do from scratch. Sometimes for more photorealistic things, I really take photos and put them in.
Nice. So when it comes to the Auto Mixer, which is the plugin that I'm working on, and the plugin that we are going to add knobs to, I want to do this graphical user interface with knobs because there are some that need to disappear depending on the context. So if you have the Auto Mixer for video enabled, I need some knobs to appear. And in some cases, I want to group the knobs so that it is easier to explain to the user what's going on. These knobs go together, those knobs go together. And in JSFX with the default sliders, all I can do is leave little gaps and try to make them very descriptive in the labels, and I can show and hide them, which is a relatively recent feature in Reaper, but I now can at least hide the sliders that don't do anything. But what are your reasons? Why do you go for a graphical user interface as opposed to just the sliders?
Well, exactly what you just told us.
Oh, really?
It was yes, it is about when you open the plugin and you have to read what is which slider doing each time. You can't even say, well, I'm using these 10 plugins all the time, so I know my plugins, because they all look the same. They all have sliders slider under slider. And so you don't immediately see which plugin is it and how did I set the plugin. So if you have a user interface, you can recognize your plugin and you maybe know where which knob is, and you can really see how much is it turned and things like that. So it speeds up the workflow, and it makes the plugin more intuitive. But not only more intuitive, while mixing music, you really need a faster workflow, so you don't forget the image you had in your head for the song, or the impression of the sound that you want to reach, and the impression of the sound that you had before, and the changes you want to make, and things like that. So you really need to be fast with your mouse clicks in the plugins, and really showing GUI helps a lot.
Yeah, I was expecting that perhaps you would answer something that I also want to know about, which is in the default JSFX slider, you can only have linear range. But in many cases, you would want something logarithmic, like a frequency or something like that. And when you're doing your own knobs, you can have sophisticated control over how the range is going to react. You can even do things like 1/3 of the first third of the slider will be 50% of the range, because that's where you want to have less control. And then there are 2/3, the rest of the knob is going to be dedicated to just like perhaps the upper 10%, or you can do even jumps in the range and that sort of thing, which gets tricky, but in some cases makes everything easier to use. Do you ever go this route?
Actually not, but I would immediately know how to do it. So if we want to show that today, that would hopefully no problem. And but yes, you're right. You can do that with your own knobs, and you can't do that with sliders. Absolutely correct. And another thing you can do with self-created knobs are things that I'm actually doing in the plugins all the time. And this is alternating knob functions. For example, I have a knob and I can turn it with a mouse as usual. And while holding Alt or Option on a Mac, another knob turns with this knob I'm turning, or counter the knob I'm turning for gain compensation or things like that. So you can couple things together, which I believe is not possible with sliders with key modifiers.
Yeah, the only key modifier I know is to go into fine grain control.
Yeah.
So that our movements are you can control things more precisely. But yeah, that's a very clever thing. I never thought about this. That you can couple the functionality that usually in a piece of hardware you would use two hands, but because you only have one cursor in the box, you would use these kinds of things. Very clever. All right, let's get to it. So how do you want to do this? Do you want to show the code that you usually use in your plugins, or do you want to write something from scratch? How do you want to do this?
Well, I'd like to show you how I do this first, the graphics file with this JKnobMan thing briefly.
Awesome.
And then, yeah, we could do it from scratch, but don't worry, it won't be too long. It's just a few lines. And of course, I took yesterday evening for preparing this, so we don't have to go through hundreds of lines of my codes.
That's very nice of you. I didn't know that you spend time doing homework on a Sunday for this stream.
Sometimes.
That's very nice of you.
Sometimes. Yeah. So let's go into it.
Yes. Okay. Here we are.
Yes, I see. I have this thing here from the Skype call on my screen that isn't visible on the stream, right? Okay, fine.
Yeah, I don't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about, so probably you're right.
Okay. Yes, okay. I'm a bit irritated and do this usually. So, fine. Well, there's an app called JKnobMan, which I got from the internet, which is a some kind of Java thing. And I gotta show you this first. This is how I make the knobs. So here we see a knob in a preview of 3 states where it can be put. Yeah, you place elements. So maybe this green element is what ends up being this green fill outline of the knob. And you can really place the elements, choose from shapes, do different colors, and the interesting thing is the kind of masking or rotating. So you can always say it starts at a certain point and it ends at a certain point. So maybe let's take the the little pointer that moves with the rotation of the knob, which will start. Where is it? Okay, I'm so good prepared. Here, rotation. Rotation. It starts at minus 140 degrees and then goes up to 140 degrees. So it starts here and ends there. And when I change this, you see all my graphics things will change too. Of course, that wouldn't make so much sense. So let me put that back. Yeah, that's how you can make these knobs having their positions and rotation things and things that don't rotate, that are just graphical elements, while the background always stays transparent, the final PNG file. And the thing is, when I now go to the preferences, I can tell how big it should be in pixels. So that would be 75 pixels. I could make this just 60. Then the knob will end up smaller. And can render be. I usually take 61, but for today, let's take 100 because it's so fine number. And then
why 61? That seems odd.
Oh, no, that's not too odd at all. Because imagine you have a knob from a center position completely to the left and completely to the right. You need the center position, and then I have 30 positions in every direction.
Ah, I see.
And actually, I figured that out when I started making plugins, that this amount of positions for the knob in the graphical display is enough for a realistic turning knob design. So it's not like you have only 2 positions, but you don't need hundreds of positions.
Okay, so I guess you should be then rendering 101 frames, right?
Yeah, I can render 101 frame if you like. But that will make no difference.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't be able to tell. So I have many questions about this already. The first is... so this program is going to spit out 101 images, 101 PNGs. And
No.
No? Okay.
It spits out exactly 1 PNG.
Ah, okay. But it's going to have all the knob positions side by side. So it's going to be one of those image sprites that sometimes people use in HTML and that sort of thing to reduce the number of files that the browser has to download. Similar story here.
Yes.
And I guess it will also reduce the number of files that we have to load in JSFX, which is similar problem to what you find in the browser. Let me say hi to Bo and Mage who are here. Hello, it's great to have you here.
Hi. Nice. Okay, you said you had a couple of questions. More questions? Or?
Yeah. So this is going to spit out one image, and in JSFX we'll have to, I guess, draw parts of the image depending on the state of the button. But another way of doing a knob is to use the primitives in JSFX to draw. So in JSFX, you can ask to draw squares and rectangles and lines and circles, that sort of thing. Have you ever done it that way instead of using images?
Yes, I have. But most of the time, let me see if I have a plugin where we can quickly see something like that. What I'm talking about now, what you can't do with simple graphical elements like circles and lines and stuff in JS. Let me put it this way: it will always look a bit simple, a bit Windows 3 like.
I see.
So let's take a look at this plugin, where this is the knob, and you see the shadow of the knob. And as I turn the knob, the shadow is always correct to what's going on the knob. And these are things I can do with KnobMan, which are not impossible, but really hard to do with just graphical elements to use in JS code.
Absolutely, I guess your knobs would end up looking like Ableton Live.
Yes, a bit like that. Although this knob I'm using today is a bit like Ableton style.
Yeah, but it has some skeuomorphism going on because there is a bunch of shadows and highlights, and it looks three-dimensional.
Yes, and I really like this kind of look. I know that a lot of people like this way more simple thing, but to me, I'm kind of eye candy guy.
Which I guess is a big part of convincing people to look at your plugin in the first place, because even if it looks great, if it performs great, you still have to convince people to try it out. And I guess this is the kind of detail that stands out when you're looking at plugins.
Yes, and it was, I guess 13 years ago, a producer told me the plugins have to be nice. It was long time ago before I myself made plugins. But I asked him why he buys all these expensive plugins that look so nice but do the same stuff as other plugins. He said, well, it has to be nice because if it's nice, I'm using it. And I like to look at my screen and like to turn the knobs. And if I like what I see, I'm making a better sound. So the graphics of the plugin has an impact on the sound.
I agree. I very much agree. And I guess the other question I have is, there are plugins that do not only inputs with knobs, but also some kinds of outputs. So for instance, if you have a knob that will set the threshold on a compressor, then in some cases there is this outer ring that is the meter for the sound coming in that helps you adjust the threshold. And then there will be some other kind of indication of the gain reduction on the knob itself. Is this something that you ever did in one of your plugins?
No, not with a knob. But I think that's primarily because I don't like this, how would I call it? Ring-shaped metering is something that I just, it's my personal taste. Aesthetically don't like. But where I did some things like that is the some channel plugin, where you have the metering, the input metering, and the threshold is then a black ring on this metering. So we have something like that. That, by the way, this ring is a graphical element from JS.
Oh, so that one you are drawing using the JSFX primitives.
Yes. And yeah, so I'm kind of adapting the idea, but I didn't do this circular metering. But that would be no problem to do circular metering with KnobMan, and you could have two files, maybe one file that shows the position of the knob and another file underneath which does the metering. Is no problem.
Right, because they need to move independently, so you would need to layer the two. Right, okay, so I guess, did you already export?
Oh, no.
Let's go ahead and do that then.
So, yeah, export image. And I put that in my Tukan folder, maybe, and call it my knob. Zip. So it's exported. And maybe let's have a look at this file. And this is a file. Looks like this with all the knobs. How can I zoom in? And here we can see our 101 rendering positions.
Very nice.
So it starts with all to the left and ends up with the last frame, which then is all to the right. So that is what you get from KnobMan. That's the graphical file. So,
nice.
Do you mind if we go on?
Yeah, let's
see what we can do here in REAPER. So I have one thing where I already prepared something where we hopefully get. And but we can start with a complete empty plugin. So we're just having the sections without any code. I hope that's fine for everyone.
Yes.
So far.
If people watching this probably know about these sections of code. Yes.
Yeah. So maybe at first we would need a slider, which maybe starts with an initial position of 0. And yeah, where do we want the left position of this slider? Tell me something.
Let's say that this is going to be a slider for setting the threshold on a compressor. So
okay.
We want to go from minus, let's say minus 60 up to 0.
Minus 60 to 0 in steps of
0.1, yeah.
And we call it threshold, right?
Yeah.
And I made something wrong. I forget to set a number. So it's slider 1. By the way, when I would say, okay, this is a threshold slider, I would have done the knob differently, because a threshold slider would start here and be completely black on the outline on the last position. And
okay,
but that's no problem. Let's quickly change that and generate a new file. So we have a threshold thing. So this is our green thingy here. And we start at 130,
that's so nice.
40. And then we have it in the other direction. So I make a new knob file here, export. What did I say? My knob. Whoops, replace. Okay, so we get a nice threshold knob. So,
I have another question about the file that is generated. How does it deal with high definition displays, so the retina displays? Do you have to export at 2x and resize in JSFX, or does it generate a PNG with high density? How does that work?
Leandro, wrong question. No, it's simply I don't like this high definition retina display thing and 4K display thing and HD display things, because I'm running into problems with that all the time.
Oh, really?
I'm using, yes. I started designing the plugins for HD displays where they all look fine, everything was fine and shiny and nice. And I published the plugins. And some people said, well, the plugin is too big for my screen. Why are all your plugins so big? And there were people using old laptops with screen resolution that really is nothing like HD graphics. And other people used retina displays and said, well, your plugin is so small, I can't see anything. And other people just use 4K graphics where you can, I've heard, scale how big things should be and things like that. So people told me to make the plugins scalable, which I did. But I did that with a very nasty workaround. I just draw it like I do it in the HD graphics I always do, to an off-screen buffer, and then on-screen buffer it again with the scaling.
Ah, I see.
So that's my simple workaround. So if you have a retina display, it will be a bit blurred.
So there would be no way for you to... Hang on, there is a way in JSFX for you to detect if you are in a high definition display or not.
Yeah, yes. This give X retina X retina thing.
Yeah.
Which we can check if we have a retina display or not. And yes, I'm using this in order to set the scaling to twice the size if you're using retina displays. But
so what you're doing, I thought that what you were doing was doing the high definition one and then downsizing it when you are not in a high definition display. But what you're doing is the opposite. You are doing the rendering in low DPI and then stretching it out.
Yes, exactly. And that's because if you have a high definition and lower the resolution, some graphical elements could be lost.
I see.
If there's some smaller, like 2 pixels or 3 pixels, they can be lost in the transition.
Right.
So that's why I say, okay, it's better to not to downscale, but to upscale and have it a bit blurry, but you can still see everything. But of course, the correct, really fine way that you should do, which I of course not do, is you could always do it like you have the GFX section and you say GFX extrin retina gleich 1 and then you have to do all your graphics code twice.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. You would have to load different images and you would have to position things in different places.
Yes, and you can do that, of course. Where is this JKnobMan thing again? You have this preferences here, where you can set the pixels in the output, how big it should be rendered. So I now chose 60 pixels. I could make it a lot bigger and bigger and bigger, and then depending on how I load it in the plugin, it will be then nice and not blurred and very sharp. And
that's what we do on the web. We render images double their size, and then using HTML and CSS, we resize it down. So we load an image that is 200 by 200, and in CSS we say, but this image should occupy 100 by 100. So then it is double the density.
Yeah. And this is actually what we will see in the graphics section for my plugins soon for the knobs. So you don't have to use it in 60 by 60. You can rescale it in the plugin, but then it's, of course, rescaled. So you could use a bigger image and then downscale it depending on what you want to do. So, of course, you can do that. I'm not doing that, but my function is already prepared for things like that.
Nice. Okay, so now let's put this knob on the screen.
Okay, so now we have this slider. Plugin finished. Slider ready. No,
that's how I do it.
We need the file name. And this was my knob PNG. I hope that works now. And in the graphics section, I hope everyone knows that you could set. Okay, let's have a starting position. X is 0 and Y is 0, and then we would use this code: JSFX Blit file name. I forgot something here. It is like done like this, right?
Yeah, I don't use files all that often, so I don't know it off the top of my head, but this looks correct to me.
Let's
cheat. Just to make sure that I understand this, what you had to do was to export your knob into the same folder as the JSFX that we see. That's why you're able to just say my knob.png and it will find it.
Yes, actually, in my regular plugin stuff, I always keep all the plugins in one folder. All the Tukan plugins are installed in one folder. And then each plugin has its own folder for the graphical elements and libraries it needs to import. So I can say then, like here, bus tools, and then which file should be loaded.
I see. Nice. And since I interrupted you, let me continue interrupting you, because we have a question here from Mage asking if, well, first, he comments that the outer rings that show the level of modulation in synths, that's the kind of outer ring that I was talking about, but also asks about SVG or OpenGL, if it's too difficult or impossible in JSFX. As far as I understand, JSFX is not does not speak OpenGL. In fact, REAPER in general does not speak OpenGL. Everything is done in the CPU. All the drawing of the whole REAPER interface, including JSFX, but everything else in the DAW is done on the CPU. It's not optimized for the GPU. And as far as SVG goes, also not possible to load. I think that JSFX will only do PNGs and JPEGs. But truth be told, when we were working on Bezier curves in my library, I said, and I stand by it, it would not be the end of the world to create an SVG renderer in JSFX for the simplest SVGs. Don't get started with like blurs, shadows, that sort of thing. But just for basic shapes, it would not be the end of the world, because we already did the work of Bezier curves, and a path in SVG is just a bunch of Bezier curves in a row. So it could be a fun little side project that we may get to in the near future. Anyway, so am I right? Is SVG a possibility?
I don't know. I just use PNGs.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's all that JSFX supports. And the advantage, of course, of using SVGs is that it is scalable. So you wouldn't have to export things in two different ways, and then it would never be blurry.
Yes, it would be very beautiful, but always keep in mind we're doing plugins. So it's not a web layout thing or things like that. And we don't have to use OpenGL. We're not programming compits or things like that.
Yeah, the OpenGL is kind of interesting if you're doing more than, I guess, just for knobs, it doesn't matter. But if you're doing something more like a spectrum analyzer, if you are doing a waveform display, if you are doing anything that is going to draw a lot, then it would be nice to have the possibility of optimizing this and rendering on the GPU. But in JSFX, it's not a possibility. It is possible to do something like that with iPlug. I'm pretty sure you can do something like that with Juice as well, but we are in JSFX, so let's continue.
Yeah, we had this what was it, multi-band thing that just released a week ago, where we had this thing. It is quite graphics intense, if you want to call it like that. Let me mute the output of this REAPER project so we don't need to hear what's in the track. But you can see it works quite well, and it takes 0.5% of my 2012 iMac here.
As far as I know, that CPU number is only for the audio portion. The GFX section is not measured there.
Okay, I didn't know that before.
It's just an intuition, and I think that at one point Thale confirmed this intuition to me, but I remember I was working on some plugins, and I was not really working on plugins, I was working on the infrastructure and trying to understand how JSFX works, and I made something that was super, super slow to draw, but the audio portion was okay. The audio was, I guess, doing nothing, so the CPU indication there was almost at 0, and my whole computer was falling apart.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that before. That's interesting. And that's good to know for me. because I always checked, okay, what's going on here? And I thought, well, okay, I can do more. My graphics is not killing the CPU already. So, interesting. Interesting. Good to know. Okay, let's go on. So, as we usually would do is using this this command JFX blit, whatever that means. Can you help me out with that?
Yeah. So first, the source needs to be, I guess, the file handle number 0.
Oh no, I just meant this blit. Is a command which I don't know where the word comes from.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, it comes from...
is image.
Yeah, bitmap something. I don't remember what it stands for, but I do know that it comes from the field of computer graphics, and it is the term that most people use when talking about the concept of taking a bitmap, so in this case the image, and then I would say like copying or transferring it into another place, in this case the frame buffer that we see as the user interface. So blit is a term of art from computer and graphics.
Ah, yes, okay. So let's blit that file we created. So the first thing we have to tell this is the file. The second thing would be the scaling. So I take original size, which would be 1. And a third thing is another interesting thing, the rotation. So you could render a file with just one knob in one position, and then do everything for the graphics with this rotation, which I set to 0. But in my first plugins, I did it like that. But the problem was that you always rotate the whole PNG file. So there's nothing about fixed elements or things like shadow thingies, or the shadows will rotate with the knob It were my first problems with that until I found this KnobMan app, which is really, really handy for making knobs. So, okay.
Yeah, I guess the way you would do it is first you would have to design something that has no shadows, no highlights. Then you could render a PNG that is just highlights and shadows. As long as your buttons don't have indentations, if it is a perfect circle, then the highlight and the shadow will not move around. Yeah. But it's still, KnobMan seems like a much better solution for this.
It would make things simpler in RAM use, but that's all, I think. And well, I hope we have enough RAM for loading this small PNG file. So yeah. Let's put that file in there. So what we see is it's blitting. Is that the correct verb for that?
I think so. Blit? That's how I use it.
It's blitting the file, so we have the knob with all the positions, but that's not what we want it to do. So then we would say we have a start in the in this axis, in the x-axis, which I would say is at 0 because all the knobs are drawn one under the other, and we have an offset for the y-axis, which I would say, okay, we're starting with this first image, so we're starting at 0 and 0, and then we could say how big should it be, 60 and 60. So we're just taking the first frame of this whole thing, and now we have this first frame. And if I would say, okay, I would need the second frame, then let me see, this value needs to be 60, right? So it moved a bit. That's basically how I use this blit command. So maybe let's don't make it too complicated. Let's have this little function I made. It's just 4 lines, so don't worry. We can go through the code very quickly. Wow, sirens. And,
yeah, is it here or there?
No, it's not here. I'm at an absolutely sound isolated.
Yeah, it is here.
Okay, they're building a house over there, and you don't hear the machines down here. So
nice. That's the dream. Okay. I would love to live in a place like that.
Yeah, sometimes that's nice. Okay, the function where we would need. Okay, the function is for drawing a knob, of course, and we would need the position for the coordinates, so x in, y in. We would like the PNG size, which we had here is 60, because we rendered this to 60 pixels. We need the minimal value of the slider, because this is where the first frame of the PNG would be taken. We need the maximum value for the slider. We need to know how many frames we rendered. So instead of 61, we took 101. We want to know which slider we want to draw. So in this case, we only have one slider, but if we have maybe 20 sliders, this could be handy. We want to know which file we want to draw, because I could have rendered knobs in different colors or completely different knobs. Mm-hmm. And we want to know the scaling for the knob. So there's a lot to put in into this function, but we need all this in order to simply draw a knob. And then, of course, we would take the position for the knob, which is this line. So we start at the X position and the Y position, and we say, yeah, draw it at full, what is it, saturation?
Opacity, alpha.
Opacity, yeah. So that's this line. The next line is, oh, that's a German word. it means way. The way for the slide is from how many in absolute value, how many
the range of the slider
minimum, the range, yes. And this is for this knob would be 60. We're starting at -60 and going up to 0.
Yeah, so, for people who are really paying attention to all this series of streams, the lines that we are looking at in the library that we are implementing, they are called map, where you map from the range of -60 to 0 to the range of, I guess in this case, 0 to 100, because we have 101 images. They are indexed from 0 to 100.
Yeah. So, okay, let's replace this word with range. Range is good. And it has to be somewhere again, because it wouldn't make sense using it. What? I don't see it. Do you see it?
I don't see it, no.
Okay, maybe we come across that later. Or it simply isn't needed. But I saw that yesterday. Okay, let's go on. So we have the range for the slider. And then we need the K-frame or the knob frame we want to display. So we need to identify where is the slider and which is the corresponding position in the rendering frames.
Yeah, so I think that what is happening here is if you pass the minimum and maximum value the other way around, K-frames would be a negative number. But if you used the range instead of the subtraction on the denominator, then you would get a positive number, which is what you want.
Yes.
But let's just be careful and always pass a maximum value that is greater than a minimum value, because it makes sense anyway.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we take the slider's value and subtract this the left position. So maybe if I put that down to 30 and we have -60 on the left position, this would be something like 30. And then I multiplied this with frames, so 101 minus 1, because our first frame starts at 0, at the 0 position in the PNG file. And all this is that's where this comes from. Is divided by the range, of course, because this wouldn't give us an information. This gives us an absolute information, and this takes it relatively to the absolute range.
Yeah, the way that I like to think of this is you start with a slider, and the slider may be in the slider is a value that is in a range that doesn't necessarily start at 0. In this case, It starts at -60. So you translate that so that you pin it to start at 0. Then I prefer to think of it the other way around. I prefer to think of the division first and then the multiplication, because what you're doing is you are taking the full range of the slider and dividing by that, which means that you will get a number between 0 and 1. And then you multiply that number between 0 and 1 by frames minus 1, which will get you a number between 0 and the number of frames. So you're sort of normalizing the slider, and then you're multiplying by frames minus 1. Anyway.
Exactly. Yes, your explanation is so great. I really like it. And then, of course, one other thing happens, which is this source Y. Source Y, because the frames are all one under the other. Is I floor this result from here and multiply it with the PNG size So the size, or rendering size per frame.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't floor this stuff, you're going with what's that, floats, doubles, how you call these variables in in JS. So it won't necessarily start at the beginning of a frame, but somewhere in
because
between.
we are talking about pixels here, and you cannot divide a pixel in half.
Yeah. So I'm flooring that. So I always start at a frame's begin. And for the frame size, I'm using this PNG size, which I input here for the frame size we had in the rendering from the KnobMan app. And then all this stuff is taken to simply blit the knob to the correct position. So we're blitting the file with the scaling we're giving here. It has no rotation at this point. And it starts at, 0 in the x-axis. So we're always starting on the complete left of our PNG file. And we're starting at this important thing we got here, the position of the final frame we want to use. And then, of course, we're just splitting one frame. So PNG size, right? So if I now would say knob, and then we would go in 10, 10. Oh, I'm sorry. 10, 10. PNG size was 60. Minimum was minus 60. Maximum is 0. Do we have frames? Is 100 and what's up here? 101. Oh, sorry. I'm not looking at my screen. Okay, the slider is slider number 1. The file is file 0, and the scaling is 1. Was that okay from the speed? Yeah, okay. And so this command here will call the knob function with all the needed parameters, and hopefully that works. Boop. When I now move this slider, and yes, it works.
Nice, very nice.
So that's how the how this thing would be blitted to the correct where the slider points. The knob is always pointing where the slider points. So another funny thing, just to interrupt myself, is I last touched our slider threshold. Can learn that. Let's check that out. Okay, and now I've learned that slider here, and I can, from my controller, control a slider or a self-made knob. That's quite cool. And I checked that because yesterday on the release video of the new plugin compressor number 3, someone wrote that this controller thing with the plugins isn't working, but we see it is working. It works with the other plugins as well. So I tested that yesterday too. So whatever you do to the slider happens to this knob, which is nice. And then you could say, okay, the knob is too small. Coming back to your question, I could give it another scaling.
And then it's going to look a bit blurry in that case because you're scaling up.
Yes, like this, you see it's getting blurry.
But
I could also scale it, to any size I want. So that's comes handy. I did this scaling thing in this function because it comes handy when you're not making a graphics interface for the JS plugin as such, but for the MCP or TCP support, where you never know how much space you have.
Right.
And, if you want to put your graphical elements correct in this unknown area, you always need this thing with any numbers. So it could be 1.001 scaling, but it could be needed sometimes. And it works.
Right. And when you are adapting the user interface for the MCP or the TCP, what else do you do besides just rescaling the buttons? Do you hide buttons, and do you have components that are just for the MCP and you render them only in that context?
Oh, let me show you that. It's more than that. In the let's take something in the master. Let's see what we could use for that. Let's take compressor 2, which is a nice example. Where you could have this graphical thing for the compressor here, which is looks like a plugin, as we know it. And when I now put that to MCP, it will not just be the same. It will be a complete different thing. So it's just showing us this compressor curve and the values for the compressor, but not the plugin as it is. And I have another mouse support here. Oh, I'm sorry. You can switch to a needle graphics, and then you could, with Alt, you could move the threshold in this graphics thing. In MCP or TCP support, most of my plugins simply are nothing like this. They're doing the same audio thing, but they have their own graphics.
Nice. Very nice. It is mostly that little display on the right of the plugin.
Yes, it is, but most of the plugins also are controllable. How was that in this plugin? With control you could do the knees, the ratio setting, and with Alt the threshold. So it's not only this thing here, but also this knob and this knob with key modifiers. And you could have other plugins, which is also where I made the last modifications about that. Let's don't get too far, but I can show that was this tape recorder, which I always liked this graphics for. It's a bit like we know it from the Universal Luna, where we have this turning reels.
Nice.
Tape recorders. And someone told me, yeah, that's nice. That's a SE online today. Edu, are you here? Edu asked for me to be here today, so maybe he's around.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it was Edu who said, well, that's nice having this turning reels graphics. It's eye candy. It's fun. But, and we can switch that from the menu, knobs for this control and this control are more handy if you're really working and not only looking at how nice it is. So now we have knobs here. And I think, yes, with Alt clicking, I can even change that. So I have the nice graphics if I don't need the knobs. If I need the knobs, just click. So that's things that I do with MCP support.
Nice. And then the display of these little buttons is probably going to be used in the scaling that we saw in the function.
Yes, exactly. These are the same buttons like these. And they are rescaled then to whatever space is given for the MCP or TCP support.
All right. Another question I have is, are all your knobs always attached to a slider? Because there are plugins in which you run out of sliders because you can only have 64 sliders in JSFX. So then you have to keep your own internal stage and use the serialize section to save everything, restore everything. Do you ever run into that kind of problem, or are the sliders good enough in all cases?
No, sometimes. When I'm doing very complicated plugins, I don't have enough sliders, so I need to take this serialization, which I'm always a bit afraid because the sliders, I really know what they're doing. I can see them if I'm not hiding them, And I know that the sliders are stored with the plugin in the project and everything's fine. And yeah, it's more like it's up to me doing the serialization correctly. So if I don't do that correctly, I run into bugs. And so I try to avoid this. But sometimes I have to do this. And what I do in then is, and this is why this code is like this, it says vSlider here. And this is because if I don't have enough sliders stop at slider 63. No, 64, because we're starting at 1.
Yes.
So, and if I need slider 65, which simply doesn't exist. So if I write 65, it doesn't exist. I always call it vSlider 65 for virtual slider.
Ah. And then you write some serialized block to store and retrieve
and
this.
And then I would store this in the serialization block and use it as a kind of regular slider during the plugin development.
Okay.
But
and
there are problems.
I suppose that
there
that function...
are problems because you can't assign these virtual sliders to MIDI mappings. You can't put automation envelopes on virtual sliders and things like that. So you have to the most important things you have to keep on the real sliders. Yeah,
and I suppose that you also have to rewrite some of this knob function because it is using slider of vSlider on the keyframe line.
Oh no, because these things are private to the function.
Yeah, but that line that reads slider parenthesis vSlider, that will not work with a virtual slider.
No, that's true. So I can show you another thing which could be interesting because in reality it all looks a bit different then. So here we have a plugin that has a lot of sliders, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it just fills the whole row. So and it has a lot of knob files and things like that. And then I go where I have the function knob, and I have a function knob2, which is doing different things then. So if I'm modifying the functions, if I need another thing, like you just said, for vSliders, I would need the knob function. But I used the knob function already while programming. I would just make knob2 or vknob or something like that, and then modify it and use that with the vSliders.
All right. Okay. And can you make this plugin? You were showing us how this plugin will show you the frequency response and whatnot. So can you make it consume a lot of CPU real quick? Because Bo had an idea to test my theory that the CPU meter on the lower left was only for audio. And his idea was to disable the user interface. And I think that that's something you can only do in VSTs. You can only disable the user interface in VSTs. But what you can do is...
Well, I can shut it off. So let's go here.
Yeah,
JSFX.
So right now it's consuming 0.6, 0.7% of your CPU. And are you just going to comment out the whole code or remove it?
I hope I can safely remove it and get that later from my GitHub again. So, boop. And it's taken the same amount.
Yeah, so that seems indication that perhaps this is only the audio processing.
Yes, it seems so. Why? Undo worked. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I always learn. Okay. Should we go on?
Yes.
Or are there more questions or things to disable?
Well,
Okay.
I have a technical question about JSFX that is very in the weeds. So the question is, variables like the ones you have, like keyframe, source y, and so on, they are variables that exist in the global scope, in the sense that these are variables that you see on the right pane on the editor. And if the same name is used in the GFX section and in the sample section or the block section, those names could clash. If you had another variable called source y, for whatever reason you have that variable in the audio processing part of things, that variable would clash and you would start getting weird behavior because you would be writing and reading from the same variable even without intending to do that. So my question is, do you ever run into this problem in practice?
Yes. And this is really annoying because this is where some of the major bugs come from, and where you look at your code and think, well, that's all fine what I did there. So where is the problem? And then you discover that you somewhere in some lines which you actually not even using anymore, and you wonder, why didn't I delete them or comment them out while they are still running? You somehow set the same variable name for something which you don't need anymore, and that makes problems. So I'm running in things like that. And what is even more a problem is when you have functions that can be called from the whatever section, graphics section, and these are called while another thing like the sample section sets variables that are used in this function, because then these variables can be corrupted by the sample section because it's running at the same time. So that's a thing that is really to avoid.
Yeah, and how do you deal with that? What is your style for dealing with that? When you find one of these issues, do you just rename a variable? Do you come up with some other strategy?
Yes, I have a very quick and dirty strategy. I can show you what I'm doing. So usually in the slider section, you would say what is happening when a slider is moved. So we would say, for example, variable thresh would be slider 1. And if I now move the slider, the variable would take this value of the slider. So what I'm doing, because sometimes I'm moving this from slider movement, sometimes I'm using it from controller movement, sometimes from the graphics section. And even sometimes if I go completely crazy, I'm putting sliders from the sample section or from the block section. And what I do is another German word. I'm always programming it like this: function, which means instead of slider, statt slider, and would put my sliders thing here, and would another thing I call caller here, and then caller is 1. And then in the sample section, caller 1, yes, and then go to the statt slider thing.
This is interesting because we wrote code that it looks almost exactly like this on our last coding session.
The very important thing is this line, slider on is 1, and from here, if it has run, slider on is 0, and the function is only called if it's not already running.
Ah, okay. You want to avoid race conditions because the function may not be, the technical term for this is re-entrant.
Yeah.
In the field of parallel programming, that's what people call it. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right though, but your function may have side effects, and you only want to have the function running once at a time. You don't want to have multiple copies of it running.
Yes, and that's what I'm doing. I don't know the technical terms because I'm not a software developer, but that's how I managed to do it, and I think it's quite quick and dirty. But this function is only called from this one process in the samples section, and whenever I want to call this sliders function, or this instead of sliders function, I just write caller is 1. And next time the samples section is has its turnaround, it will call this thing if the caller is 1.
Very clever. You reinvented some kind of mutex, some kind of semaphore where you're synchronizing things that way. Very interesting. And people here on the chat are saying, could you multiplex two V slider values together on 10x the value of the second, then store the value in a single real slider? I am not sure I understand the question. Do you understand the question?
Yeah, I understand the question. You could maybe if you'd said I have a slider going from 1 to 10, and I want to store that, and then I need another slider and want to store that in the same slider, and the other slider is also going from 1 to 10. You can't simply add them because you would have a slider from 1 to 20, and this would be when it's stored like 9, you couldn't say which was slider 1, which was slider 2. But you could say, okay, I multiply and multiplex in that way the second slider by 10. So I have 1 to 10 for the first slider, and in steps of 10 to 100 for the second slider. So I multiplex them into one slider to store them.
In this way, you are... that's interesting. You are sort of making
that's kind
a
of
number. You're turning a number into a data structure, but not in a bitmap way. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, and this way you could have a single proper JSFX slider for multiple virtual sliders on the interface.
Yes, exactly. I don't know why I would do that. Maybe because of if I'm running out of sliders. So I have 64 sliders, and if I need more, I could begin multiplexing sliders. But when
this way, like
so,
madness.
Well, I did things like that, but not for sliders that have ranges. I did that for maybe several knobs that can be on and off, and then I bitmap them on one slider.
That's crazy. I love this idea because people run out of sliders. In ReEQ, for instance, Justin Johnson said that he would like to have many more bands that you could automate. As you mentioned, you can only automate the real sliders, not these virtual sliders. So if you could put in the same data structure the frequency and the gain and the Q of a band, you could store everything in one slider. And you could, I guess, extend this idea and store many more things in a single number and make that your slider.
Yeah, it's basically it's the same idea, but not bit mapping in a binary system, but in other numerical systems.
Crazy. I love it. We'll do it. We'll absolutely do it. And it sounds like the thing a madman would do, because if you change a single thing, like if you change a single slider, your whole data structure will be off. It will be amazing to do upgrades on these kinds of plugins. I love it.
Yeah, great. I'm already loving it, yeah. No, I will not do it, because I try to avoid everything that runs me into too much, too much chance of bugs.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess this is another reason why you would want to have user interface sliders instead of just plain JSFX sliders, because you can do this kind of magic and have more. Well, I guess it would not work with automation, because the automation will see the underlying value. If you have this crazy multiplexing thing, you will be automating something nonsensical. So perhaps not.
Yeah. But when it comes to, well, okay, then this function is simply not automatable. You could use it like that.
Yes, but I guess it negates one of the main advantages of having this, which is to have automation. And I guess it would alleviate some of your work on the serialize section, but it would be so much more work to do the packing and unpacking of the values in the first place that I don't think it's probably not going to be worth it.
Not necessarily, no. And about this thing that Justin said, the REAQ thing, well, if you need more bands and to automate them all, and what did he say, 16 bands in his EQ, why would you automate more than 16 bands at a time? And if you
it's probably
need things like that, well,
it's probably not for mixing or mastering. It's more probably for sound design.
Yeah, and if you need something like that, well, you could simply throw another instance of the plugin on your in your plugin chain.
Sure thing.
So,
yes.
Sometimes I'm like, well, I could do I could put more in one in one plugin. So if I'm already making this multi-band thing, I could do a compressor, and I could do the envelope shaper, and I could do a gate, and I could do a saturation and a funny colored bubbles or whatever per band. So I could put all that in one plugin, and at the end of the day, I run out of sliders. Is one thing that's not so nice about that. And the other thing is all that has to be calculated. So if I just need the multiband compressor and I never need funny bubbles, I will always have funny bubbles to be computed. So I make two plugins, the compressor plugin and the funny bubbles plugin. And if you need both, you have to input them both in your plugin chain.
I tend to prefer this too. In my own use, I tend not to use the channel strips and go for things that I know I need.
Yeah, and I think it was just today, a comment on my video on my YouTube channel where somebody just said it would be nice for the new compressor if it has two instances. So you had a compressor and then again another compressor in one plug-in to dial them in. And that's when I think, well, okay, you could load two compressors in your plug-in chain and put them side by side on your screen and do the same thing. Why would I take so much time and developing such a plugin? Probably I will do that, but it's actually it's existing.
Yeah, and I guess there are some cases in which this could make sense if the two plugins interact in some way. For instance, if you have the two compressors triggered by the same sidechain, but then the gain reductions are separate. So you could do this with REAPER routing, but it is inconvenient. It's nicer to just drop one plugin into the track and have that happen. For instance, there is I think that the name is Kotelnikov, something like that, by Tokyo Down Labs. And it is, I guess, a compressor that is more like a bus compressor, and it has the same signal feeding something that does RMS, something that does peak detection, and that it's not even RMS, it's a Hilbert transform. But anyway, different kinds of compression that happen from the same sidechain, so it is convenient to have everything in one interface. But I get your point.
Yes, but yeah, that's what I'm doing here. So if we take this new compressor, you would have a stereo compressor which has the same detector, and it's just you could leave one side. So just take the left side, and the right side you could ignore in this mode. And you could have a dual mode, which have left input on this and processing of the left on this. And the detector for this is the right input, and it processes the right channel. So you have individual control. And if you just want left and right processed by their own key signal, but you want to use them together, you can press Alt, what I said, for what's not possible with sliders, but only with self-made knobs. So I always have a synchronized thing here on the left and right channel, or you could use it for mid and side processing and things like that. What makes less sense is a stereo compressor, and behind that another stereo compressor, which gets as key input signal this already processed signal from here. If you want this, which we call stage compression, so we have one compression stage and another compression stage, I would just simply throw two of these compressors behind in my plugin chain. And not only because then I don't have to develop this thing, but also if I look at this, I would see, well, I'm using a compressor and then I'm using another compressor. So there would be a reason why I'm doing that. So I can see in my track that I'm doing that. And when there's just a compressor plug in this slot, I can't see that I've done that.
Fair enough.
So maybe it's a clever way to just use two compressors in a row.
All right, so we have a knob on the screen. I guess the next part is to use the knob instead of the JSFX slider to actually change the value around, right?
Yeah, right. And what I would do there is I can't keep all that in my head. Oh, I'm sorry if that makes noise. I touch the microphone. First of all, I would like to copy this thing here. So we use this this line, but this is very static, so it's not very useful. Instead, I would initialize my knob like this: knob X, knob Y, PNG size, and stuff, and give that to my knob function. So it's the same what I had here, but with variables. Which I have to modify because it's 101 frames, and it's, what is it? Slider size is the same. Minimum was -60, maximum was 0. So now it's modified and it should work. And let's see if it works. Yeah, it works. So that's the first thing I want to do. Because when it comes to the mouse control, we would need these things again, maybe in another function, but let's hard code this in the beginning, for the beginning, so we can simply see what we're doing and not put everything in functions. I know that if you're at the university and learn programming, you're starting writing all the functions you need in your life. And when you do your master degree.
Not necessarily. Well, it depends on who's teaching. There are people who teach in this very top-down approach, but I tend to find that it's useful, and even when I am teaching people, to go sometimes bottom-up, sometimes top-down, and sometimes both, and you switch between them. So sometimes you know you need an auxiliary function. Go ahead and write it. In some cases, you don't know exactly what you are going for. Just try to write it, and then find the correct abstraction, and then that may be a function. It may not even be a function. Some abstractions are not functions. And what I find and this is something that I picked up from Sandy Matz, who is a great educator and programmer, it is much worse to have the wrong abstraction than to have no abstraction at all. So it's much better for you to start copying and pasting things around until you realize, oh, this is similar to that. Perhaps I could extract that into a function. Perhaps this is a data structure. oh, this is not the same as that. Okay, so let me continue copying and pasting until I find the structure that I'm looking for. So I'm completely on board with not having functions to begin with.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you have the wrong teachers, what I often saw is that people are really doing so just to learn that they could all do these includes and libraries and functions and stuff. But yeah, let's keep it simple. Let's hard code this. So what I would do is maybe we can look at the code here. Mouse cap is 1. Simply means that the left mouse button is pressed. Correct?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't remember. Mouse capture is one of those variables that is actually a bitmap, so I don't remember where the bits are.
Yes, 1 is the left mouse button. -1 is the right. And then you would go like 1 and 2. Oh, 1 and 2 would be a mouse with control or with the Windows key or something like that. And 1 and 4 would be the control or the Windows key.
Yeah.
And 1 and 8 is 1 and 8
in my library, what I
and
did is I extracted all these into miniphone names. So in my library, I do mouse cap and 3, 2 or 4, and I assign those results to variable names like control, left click, right click, which is much saner.
You can see, I'm doing this.
There you go.
And this,
yeah, I guess everyone does that.
Yes, of course. So you can see control is 4 and shift is 8 and alt is 16. And so which one would be super would be 2, I think. Okay, so we have the mouse capture, which is 1. So the left mouse button is pressed. So we have a mouse click. And then I would go for checking if the mouse hovers my knob. I'm sorry, my knob.
Collision detection.
Collision detection, exactly. And this is now from mouse X is bigger than knob X because we're starting drawing our knob at knob X. And knob Y we can compare to mouse Y. So we're checking if we're in the boundaries of the knob. And so it has to be bigger than knob X, and it has to be smaller than knob X plus the PNG size multiplied by the knob scaling.
What's that about?
The knob scaling?
Yeah.
Well, that was this last thing, this scaling.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I have another notion of knob scaling in my head that I want to ask about, but let's continue.
Okay. So now I'm if I'm sure, okay, I'm dragging this knob. I'm touching the knob. Then we would do something like if we're not dragging, we initialize this thing, so we get where the mouse position is on the y-axis, and we said, okay, we're dragging now, so drag is 1. And then I would say something like drag is 1. I missed that. Yesterday it was late. And then I would say, okay, this only tells me I start dragging with my mouse because I touched the boundaries, or I'm within the boundaries of that knob. And now I'm dragging. And if I'm dragging, I have a new position. And this is, don't be too fast, the slider that this knob has, in our case, the threshold slider here, of course. Then the initialized mouse position minus the mouse position where I moved the mouse.
Okay.
That's understandable.
Yes, it is. You are just changing the value of the knob based on the change based on the amount that you move your mouse on the y-axis. And my question that I had in the back of my head here was about this line, the new position line, which seems to me it is translating from one unit to another, because old mouse Y and mouse Y are in terms of pixels. These are pixels on the screen. And the slider is not in pixels. It is, in this case, in dB. So you're doing a conversion from pixels to dB. And in this case, you are not multiplying by any factor. But in my brief experience doing user interfaces, I noticed that it was convenient to sometimes translate this into dB with like some kind of scaling, usually like 0.001, so that you wouldn't have to, the control wouldn't be so fast. You would be able to move your hand a bit more before it started changing the value.
Something like this, and multiply that with, let's call it knob speed.
Yeah, that.
So, and we would say maybe knob speed is 1.5. So now the knob moves faster.
Yes.
Yes. In my regular plugins, that's what I'm doing.
And how do you calibrate this? Do you go? What I'm doing is I'm going by feel. I use the plugin a little. I'm like, I would like this to move a little faster, maybe a little slower. So how do you do that?
Well, my plugins all have a fixed sliders speed, which I set up to. Some would say they are a bit fast. The knobs I do in my plugins here. So you can see my mouse position and where the knob is going. Some say it's too fast, but I made a survey on that. It was long ago, about a year ago, in the forums, in the REAPER forums. I asked the people how fast the knobs had to be, and this is what came out. So this is what I'm now using, because many people like it like that. And if you press Shift and turn the knob, you have to do 10 times the way with your mouse for the same movement amount.
Okay, yeah, I see. So I am going by few, and you actually did a survey. That is so clever.
Well, I at some point, at first I thought it's clever to just make the plugins the way I like them, and because I exactly know what plugins need to be, or how they need to be, and it didn't take long for me to realize that other people have other opinions on that. So, but it's okay.
But it's okay.
Yeah, sometimes there are plugins I'm actually not using, and just made them because there were people saying that these plugins are missing in the collection, and they would fit in the collection to make it complete. Where I said, well, yeah, in a way it's right. Okay, let's make this plugin so people simply don't complain. Yeah, okay. So back to the code. We have this speed thing we just talked about. So what I'm doing is I'm getting a new position from the position of the slider, the old mouse y-axis, the new mouse y-axis, and the knob speed. And after this new position is set, I say old mouse is the new mouse, of course, for the next turnaround of the graphics section. And now I can set my slider for that knob to the new position, and this looks a bit creepy in one line, but all it's doing is that the range from -60 to 0 in this case.
Yeah, it's just clipping the value to be in the range.
Right. And then we have this last line. If mouse cap or mouse capture is 0, so mouse is not clicked, drag is 0. So this couldn't be executed. So it will, the code will recognize when we release the mouse. So if this line is missing, once you have clicked the knob, it will always be attached to your mouse.
Right. Yes. So you're resetting that little state machine that keeps track of what's the state of the mouse. Interesting.
Correct. So
and
I'm taking this code, pasting it into our new plugin. Once we saw this, we've gone through all this. Where is my knob things? I'm sorry. I'm pasting it the wrong position. New position. And we need a knob speed that is not set in this plugin. So we set knob speed is 1.5. And hopefully if
is 1.5 the magic number? The magic number that you got from experimentation with people?
No. I show you that in a second. Because it's getting way more complex. This is what I'm basically doing. And the plugin now is finished because I can click here. And I can move my knob, and you see the slider moves. So whatever the slider controls in the end, in the at sample section, will be controlled from that knob. And then I could go further and say, okay, this is too fast. Let's make it slower. And now it's slower. And I can use the slider to control the knob, and I can use the knob to control the slider, so they are now correctly linked. And with this method, I can, really quickly change to another graphics file, or set the knob to another position, or say, well, that is too big. I need a smaller knob, and things like that. So that really helps creating the graphical user interface. And of course, I'm not always developing this again. So I have my bunch of functions, and I'm of course reusing it all the time.
Excellent. I have a couple questions about this. The first is also a technicality about JSFX. There are these so-called slider functions, slider change, slider automate. I never really understood what they are for, because they say in the documentation that you should be calling these functions when you are updating the value of a slider, for instance, via a knob.
Yes.
But I never used these functions, and it seems to work fine. So do you know what that's about?
Yes, this is about the automation support. And I had to learn this. Too, and this was really a problem, or still is for some plugins, for some plugins, because I have to implement that in these plugins. When I started making plugins, I made the plugins and everything worked, and I clicked with the mouse and everything worked and everything was fine. And then people came and say, well, what is it with controller support? What is it with MIDI link or LFO things or automation? And I can show you this very, very, very quickly. Let's imagine we have another slider, and we're making a a compressor maybe. So we have it from 1 to 10 in steps of, and this would be our ratio, because, we have a threshold and a ratio slider. So when I now move the ratio, I could learn this parameter, because last touched ratio. And if I now move the threshold, I could MIDI learn that, or I could modulate that with an LFO or things like that, because it would recognize I moved the threshold. But if I move the threshold from the knob, I'm sorry, I have to move the ratio before. So last touched is the ratio, and now last touched is still the ratio, because it doesn't recognize that I touched this knob. So what I would do is, in this, of course, and in my regular plugins, I am doing that, is a line that says slider automate. Oh my God, I can't type. Slider V slider, something like that. And now, because of recognizing that I moved this thing, it will get that. No, it doesn't get it, because I'm doing something wrong. It should get that I moved the threshold.
Do you perhaps want to just...
No, I didn't set that. Knob slider is the correct name. I'm sorry. Knob slider. So now it should work. Yes. Moving
Awesome.
ratio, slider automate makes it appear.
That's what that's about then. Interesting.
Yeah. That's this slider automate thing. About this slider update thing, that I didn't really get.
Yeah,
because I think the slider update thing is something about to call the slider section.
Yeah, so I have the docs here in front of me right now. Slider change, a function that provides a facility for you to notify REAPER that you have changed the slider so that it can update the display. As far as I understood, this was so that you would have the little slider on the interface, the native JSFX slider, update. But that's not necessary. I never called this function, and the slider is updated when I update the variable. This function is not necessary to call from the slider code section. It is provided so that other code sections can update the sliders. Note that this function only updates the display. It does not send an automation message to the host. This makes very little sense to me because I never called this function and everything just works. And it seems like you are on the same boat.
Yes, but I have an idea what it could be about, because you could also say that this slider, I never use it. It's something like ratio, and then, so you could give it a variable that is directly attached to the slider.
Yes.
And maybe that's for if you change the variable and then say, okay, and update my slider or something like that. But I never use that. So
that's a good guess. But no, I always
guess.
give my sliders variable names. I don't do it in the style that you are using. I do it in the style where you give a variable name to each slider right then and there. And I never run into this issue. I just update my variable and it knows to update the slider.
Ah, okay. There's a benefit of not using it like you do it, at least to me, because when I do this slider update thing, I can call which slider should be updated from this detected knob that is moved. If not, I would have to somehow update the variable thingy.
Are you saying that the slider automate function would not receive as argument my variable? It only receives as argument this slider.
We have to look that up on the page you just showed us.
I don't think they document that there.
But what I'm saying is that these slider functions, where you can call these sliders, the values of the sliders by just the address of the slider, can't be used anymore if they are attached to the variable. I think it was something like that, but I'm not sure. There was a reason why I'm not using it.
Fair enough.
Because it's very handy using it like you do.
Yeah, and I never ran into issues because I never considered automation. The clicking and dragging thing, because I haven't really worked with knobs on the user interface a whole lot so far. Interesting. Yeah, so for other things like slider show, you can just give the variable name, but perhaps for slider automation, that wouldn't work. Slider show is more recent, so that would explain it.
Yeah, I can't really remember why that was like that. Or maybe it was like if I'm doing things in a loop, calling slider show in a loop or things like that. I don't know. I don't remember why I stopped using attached variables.
Fair enough. It's just a different style.
Yeah. Should we get more complicated about that?
Always. I love complicating what's simple.
Yeah, I'm nearly done with showing what I'm doing because although it's already some lines here, it's not too much and quite understandable because it's I think, at least to me, that's there was from the simple stuff corner so far.
Yeah. And you have been doing a great job explaining everything, which helps a lot.
Thank you. And what I'm actually doing is a bit different. I'm doing what I just showed, but I'm doing it differently because you could let me explain it like this. You could set a variable, let's call it knob, and then the x variable like this, and have knob and the y.
Oh, you're using the pseudo-objects.
Yes. And that's what I'm doing then. So I would have a knob in this case, for example, which is really from practice, which is a real plugin that I already released. You could have the left threshold, and then I'm using a config function where I set some of the pseudo-objects. So, and I'm doing that for the left ratio and the left gain, left knee, and so on for all the knobs. So all I need to know about the knobs is stored in, for this left threshold dot position, x, y, speed, graphics file, and so on and so on. So everything I need to know about this thing is in pseudo-objects, so that at the end of the day, I can just simply, I have to go up a bit more. I simply call them by left threshold knob, left ratio knob, and the mouse control is in the same way. Do I have left threshold collision? Because I know the position, the X position, the Y position, and the size of this thing, and I can compare it with the mouse position. And this is what this function is doing, and it spits out 1 if I have collision and 0 if I don't have collision. So, and then I just would say, and it's the same thing we just saw in the hard-coded thing. If I have collision, left threshold is drag start. So this is just what we saw here. If I have collision, we have drag start.
Yeah.
But I only had to write the code once in the functions and with the pseudo-objects, and then can do it like this. If I have collision, drag start this knob. If I have collision on the ratio, drag start another knob. And
very nice. Yeah.
And
people who want to know more about these pseudo-objects, if you're new to pseudo-objects, I have I want to say 20 coding sessions in which we explore this idea in depth. We ended up going with a different approach. We are not using pseudo-objects. We are using what I call real objects. But the concept is similar, where you are extracting these data structures and functions that operate on the data structure.
Yeah. And it allows us to be more flexible. So this is what I wanted to show you, and then I'm nearly done with showing everything, because I could have things like, if I press Alt, the knobs are connected. This is what I've shown before.
Mm-hmm.
Can be done like, if I have right threshold collision and Alt is clicked, left is drag started.
Oh, that's very cute.
So I could even swap the knobs. If I have collision on this knob, a completely different knob will turn, or things like that. So that makes it quite easy. And let's compare the code. So what did we have? If we have collision, drag start. That's what we did here. So if mouse is clicked, if we have collision, drag start the knob, and then you have to tell which knob is drag started in order to do the correct function. So, and this is what I'm doing here. If drag is started, do this dragging thing. So move the knob with the mouse movement. And what I'm doing at the last line was resetting the drag thing. And this is what I'm doing here. If mouse click is -1, so there is no mouse click at all the knobs drag stop.
Nice. It's good to see that we started coming up with some of these abstractions, because we don't have knobs really, but we do have one plugin that is just a waveform display for the mixer control panel. And in that plugin, you can click and drag to zoom in and out. And in that case, we had to, it is sort of a knob. It's an interactive area. So we landed on an abstraction that is very similar to what you're showing. Good to have some social confirmation on this.
Like this?
Yes.
This is the new compressor scope. And actually, that's a copycat of your thing I saw in one of your streams.
Oh, you are using my implementation of this, or at least you were inspired by it?
Just inspired by it. I
Nice.
wrote this myself. But yes, you can scale that. You can even see the zoom factor down here. No, I'm zoomed by 16 dB, 24 dB. You can also reset this with control and click to a normal waveform. And I thought it was useful because you can always see the threshold of the compressor along with your waveform, and see what would be compressed and what will not be compressed.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I had in my mind the whole time when I was working on this. This kind of display for a compressor is what you see, for instance, in the compressor in Ableton Live and in the Isotope software, and it looks great. It is much easier to use than just one gain reduction thing going up and down.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to see like this, and you have the gain reduction on the top. And sometimes I don't use the scope function and use this function. So we have the input, output, and all the values for these knobs, because that's another problem. What we had was, if I'm now turning that knob, it is just like an analog gear. It's just pointing in a direction, but it doesn't give us a precise number.
Mm-hmm.
So the numbers are written over here now. On my first plugins, there are simply no precise numbers. It's just like if you have analog equipment. So on the multibyte compressor, I did that differently. So you have these numbers below the knobs all the time as a readout. Another example could be the bus compressor I made. Where is it? Is it this one? Yeah. That if I touch the knob, so if I have collision, and if I drag stop, it's gone. So that's where I extended my function, which I'm normally using, and writing another graphics code line in it just for this number thingy. And that's, of course, things that go further and further and further in the plugin development. And so this kind of doing it with the pseudo-objects and saying, okay, basically what I'm doing is what we saw here before in these hard-coded simple lines. And then later, I'm only asking collision, drag, dip, mouse wheel, beep, beep, beep. And if I'm dragging, do the pot drag thing, and so on. And then I can simply write things in the pot drag function. So what happens when the pot actually is dragged? Do I need a number readout? Do I need this? Do I need that? And I can just put or remove that in the functions then later. And that's how I actually do the knob functions and knob drawing and knob mouse control, and have all this what I've shown before at the beginning of my JFX section, the mouse modifiers.
You're giving meaningful names to the bitmap, as one does.
Yeah, like this.
Yes.
And so that I can combine these functions I'm using at the end of the code for the knobs control, so that if Alt is clicked, I can turn them together, and if I hold down the command key and click, I will reset the values and things like that, and on and on and on. So yeah, you can do whatever you want, but the trick basically is what I'm showing. I have a knob. I give the knob all the pseudo objects, and then have only this simple thing: have I collision, do a dragging, and that the knobs are more or less beautiful is a question of how I designed them in this JKnobMan app. And what we can see here, it is scalable. Wait a second, it is scalable. What we can see here is that I have a little shadow below this knob. And this is correct to the knob position, which wouldn't be possible if you drew the knob from graphical codes in the JFX.
Yes, very true.
These are the little details which I'm kind of proud of that I accomplished that, or this meter speed, which many people don't see. So you can adjust how fast the needle moves, has a little screw, and it is actually turning.
I love how you are taking pride on the details. It is very much my kind of attitude as well. Can we return to the waveform display real quick? I really want to ask more about it. So did you follow the same approach I did in terms of capturing samples when they come in the audio thread, and how you communicate those samples to the user interface, and where you're doing the decimation? How does it work?
Well, if I knew, I started this plugin making the scope view and then putting in the compressor and stuff. So I actually don't remember too well, but I think I can remember in a way, and it's quite simple. I think I'm doing that in a array. Yes, this is what comes in at the sample section, We have a buffer, the history buffer, which is writing at the history position. And it's just writing our sample value.
Oh, so you're doing the decimation on the user interface. Interesting. When I say decimation, what I mean is you're storing on this array all the samples that came in, and the actual drawing you are going to do, and you are going to be taking like 1,000 samples corresponds to 1 pixel, 1 column. You are doing this transformation from 1,000 samples into 1 column on the user interface and not in the sample block.
Yes, right. And then later in the graphical section, I take the maximum of what corresponds to this 1 pixel to get a waveform that says something. Because if you just always took the first sample that comes in that corresponds to that pixel, it would be a fuzzy thing. And another thing is, I have that here in the scope. You can set the speed for the scope. So
nice.
This was my way to just buffer all the samples for 8 seconds and then generate graphics in the graphics section.
Interesting.
So I'm not buffering graphics code in the @sample section to not get confused.
Yeah, and also you would have to reset the view if you try to do decimation on the sample block, which is what I do. You have to reset the view when you change the length. And in your case, you have the samples there, so you can do it.
Yes, exactly. And I have another buffer which writes at the same position, but with the offset of the size of the first buffer, of course.
Oh, because it's stereo. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, for the other scope, because it's stereo, right. And then later, somewhere, and that is what I always call my chaotic programming. Sometimes I do comments like, here are the threshold lines, which are these white lines here. So I may find them later. Or something like compressor plot, code. But which line is doing, I really have to read later if I need to modify it. I'm really gets us back to your very first question this evening was how do you plan a paper on a whiteboard in Photoshop? How do you lay out things? Simply, I don't lay out things and I don't lay out code, and everything comes from my hands as I'm developing it. And it's ridiculous because I'm not documenting this correctly. So I have to sometimes really rewrite things because I don't understand why I did that. But hey, here I did something. Scope left. And here we have a loop, which has the size of the buffer. And this is divided by div, and div is slider 1 definitely would be the the time window which is shown. So we're running a loop for the time window to get all the samples from the time window. And then, in a way, didn't I do that with another loop? In a way, I caught the maximum of the samples. What did I do there?
Yeah.
But you get the idea what I did. But this is everything I'm doing for the left scope in the graphics section. And this is just made up from the buffer that really buffers sample per sample. But yeah, chaotic coding. I had to read that myself again to understand what I did there.
Yeah, but I get the main points. You are drawing with lines. You are going over the samples you collected but it seems to me as though you're not considering all the samples in the block. So I said before how like 1,000 samples is going to correspond to 1 pixel because we have many more samples than we have pixels on the screen. So we would have 1,000 samples corresponding to 1 pixel, and it's not the case that we're looking at 1,000 samples.
In a way, and I don't know if I'm not seeing a loop or if I'm doing something, if I'm thinking wrong. What I can write that in in a more abstract way. What I was doing, what I can remember is I had a loop for the graphics, for the display of the scope per pixel. And in that loop, I had a loop for the sample things corresponding to that pixel, taking the maximum sample, and this would be then the line that will be drawn. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I'm somehow missing this second loop in this code. I don't know where it is gone and what I did to get rid of that. But in a way, because before I simply didn't do it, and it ended up being a bullshit graphic.
Yeah, what happens in that case is that you have to, if you're ignoring some of the samples, there may be a spike in the middle that you're missing. So you need to look at all the samples. And perhaps you are looking at all the samples, because I see that the line drawing is happening under a condition. GA needs to be true. So maybe that's how you're doing it. You're just looking over all the samples, and from time to time you realize, oh, I need to draw a line, and you go and draw a line.
No, I guess this was another stupid thing that if GA, what was GA again? It has something to do like if there's a line to draw a line. Was something like that. But as you can see, yeah, chaotic coding. So I've commented something out and replaced it with something different. I didn't know if it actually would work. And if it wouldn't work, I would delete all that stuff to get my old line back. That's how I intuition.
All right. So we have been going on here for a while now. Is there anything that you think we are missing?
Well, if there are more questions, of course, ask. And I think we will all meet and chat in the future about things which come to our mind later, which could be missing.
Yes.
But actually, about today's topic is knobs and how to create or generate them, putting them on the screen, make them mouse controllable and even automatable. We've seen all that and how that is done from the very hard code where we had this funny line here over the half hard coding with this stuff until pseudo-objects and why it is useful using them. So about today's topic, knobs, I think I've told you everything I know. And yeah, we saw some funny scope things too. So
yeah, I really appreciated the KnobMan thing, which I didn't know about, and that whole idea of using virtual sliders and trying to pack all of them into a single JSFX slider. That's a super nice trick. And even the slider automation thing I didn't know about. So I learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to meet us. I do want to say a couple of things. So first, I will be taking tomorrow off, but I will be back here on Wednesday. And I think that what I'm going to do is to implement some knobs in the auto mixer, because I think that it deserves it. All that grouping and showing and hiding, and I want to represent the things that I'm calling the group-wide knobs. I want to have them in a different place. So I think that that is a plugin that deserves knobs because we are going beyond what simple sliders can do. So I'm going to be doing that on Wednesday. And I think that everyone should go to John's Patreon. The link is in the description, and you should go and support him because he's developing plugins that he doesn't even want to use just so people can be happy. And that is commendable. And yeah, thank you to people who were here on the chat. Mage, Bo, Aviated Views Sound. It is very nice of you to join us here on the chat. Thank you also to everyone else who's just watching this but not being active on the chat. I also appreciate you. And thank you very much, John, for sharing your knowledge. You certainly helped a lot.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's it for today. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.